For most of my adult reading life, if you'd asked me who my favourite author is, I would have easily snap answered Iain M. Banks. His Culture series books, his science fiction novels, are some of my favourite books of all time. They are probably the book series that got me back into reading in a big way. Nowadays, if you ask me who my favourite author is, it's probably a bit more of a complicated question, but Iain M. Banks is still very much up there and still may be my favourite author. However, I'd never read any of his non-science fiction work. He writes non-science fiction books under his name, Iain Banks. The M probably stands for more space stuff. But I know a lot of his books that aren't science fiction do get really good reviews, and this one has been suggested to me by quite a few people. So I read his, I believe, debut novel, The Wasp Factory, and it's certainly a unique book. Just quickly here, we probably do need some content warning for this book if you're looking to read it. There are depictions of animal abuse, animal cruelty, violence against animals, as well as depictions and descriptions of child abuse, violence against children, that sort of thing. So just do be warned going in. In The Wasp Factory, our story is told in first person through the head of Frank. Frank is clearly a very, very disturbed individual. He lives a fairly isolated life on a Scottish island with his distant and mysterious father, and they've just both found out that Frank's brother has escaped from a mental institution in which he was placed and might be on the way home. Frank's brother was accused of setting dogs on fire, of terrorizing the local children, of threatening violence. The story follows Frank as he deals with the idea of Eric, his brother, returning, and as he deals with his day-to-day life and his many, many rituals. I think we just need to get this out of the way right away. Frank is clearly a sick individual. Frank is clearly psychopathic or something. I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist. I can't diagnose anyone even in a book. But Frank is clearly very troubled, very troubled, very dangerous, and is very disturbed. Frank's life is one of rituals, showing like OCD sort of signs. He protects his island with stakes with animal skulls and animal corpses stuck to them and sprinkled around them from either animals that he's found dead or animals that he's killed. He believes these are protecting his island. He has a fascination with something in the attic called the Wasp Factory that he believes gives him prophetic visions and messages. Frank is not the sort of protagonist that we're supposed to look up to in a book. Frank is not the sort of protagonist that we're supposed to believe in and want good for and want to emulate ourselves. As we learn more and more about Frank, especially about Frank's past, it becomes clear the levels of depravity and violence that he's committed in the past and the heinous crimes that he's been involved in. And we look into the ways that he's justified these to himself, or into the ways that they just haven't affected him, in the ways that these terrible events just seem to slide right off him as he doesn't witness the full impact of his actions, and it begins to be clear that Frank is probably a psychopath. While being inside Frank's head is, yes, very disturbing, it is also really, really interesting. It is the sort of character that we just never really see in science fiction or in fantasy or in anything else that I really read. I'd long been looking for a book where the protagonist wasn't a good guy. There's so many books where the protagonist is this scoundrel thief, but actually he's just a good guy in the end. You know, always makes the right decisions, always does what's best for, you know, the greater good. But this, Frank is not a good person. I would say no one in this book is a good person. This is an exploration of several very, very disturbed individuals, and despite how confronting it can be, it is done very well. Content aside, I recognise this pacing and this prose and this structure from his later Culture series works. It has a similar feel to those while being completely divorced from science fiction. This being a debut novel is particularly impressive. I feel like tackling this sort of topic and the events that come up in this book as your first novel and doing it so well is absolutely to be commended and is very impressive. All that being said, there are quite a few disturbing scenes in this book, and while some of them definitely feel integral to the plot, there are others that do just kind of feel like they're there to shock the reader, to be something that sticks in your mind so you remember how terrible this event was without really moving the plot forward. Sometimes it does feel a little bit barbaric, a little bit superfluous. And while it's written very well and the characters are very interesting and the topic is very interesting, I can't say it was a very enjoyable read. I did read the book in almost one day, partly out of interest to get to the conclusion, but also just as much out of interest to get it over with, because being inside Frank's head was not a very pleasant place to be, which very well may be the point of the book. I have to admit that I was fascinated by Frank's rituals and compulsions, especially the titular wasp factory. A large part of me reading this book so fast was to find out more and more and more about this wasp factory, and I have to say that the reveal of it is suitably interesting to me. I found everything about the Wasp Factory within the book, The Wasp Factory, to be really interesting and really well done. I think I have to jump into spoilers now, because I don't think you can talk about this book in, this day and age without touching on some of the events from the ending. And so check out the description below or the chapters and you will see when the spoilers end, and you can come back for my final review. The ending of this book, I think, comes off very differently in 2025 than it would have in 1986 when it was first written. The reveal at the end of Frank's father raising him as a male despite him actually being biologically a female might come off as a bit problematic in today's age, but I think you have to remember that when this book was written, these topics weren't as talked about and weren't as in the public eye. I've definitely seen some people say that, in this day and age that this book comes off as transphobic, and I can see where that reading would come from, but I disagree. I don't think this comes off as a slight against trans people. I think this comes off as an exploration of how Frank's father's misogyny affected not only his life but his children's lives, and how it's destroyed Frank's life and how misogynistic Frank has become because of it. Frank growing up believing that he's a castrated man and looking down upon himself as lesser because of that has affected him in a myriad of very, very negative ways. Frank's mental health is very clearly displayed in this book as very, very poor. And with how misogynistic he's become because of this, feeling that he's not that much of a man, he goes on these very difficult to read misogynistic rants at times. He resents those around him that can grow up and procreate because he believes he can't. He resents the fact that he'll never be the man that he thinks he should be. He resents the fact that he'll never be the real man that he seems to think his father wants him to be. I don't think Banks was in any way trying to be negative against trans people in this book. I think instead it was an exploration of how one's own gender identity can affect one's life. And look, I know this book is problematic in a myriad of ways, but I don't think that the gender issue is really the problematic bits of this book. I would ask that if you are going to comment about this book in the description below, please be kind. I welcome any and all sorts of people here with no judgment, no discrimination, and if you're going to be in any way against that, you'll find yourself quickly banned from commenting on the channel. All that being said, while I'm still talking about spoilers, I just want to talk about the ending that we had with Eric arriving. That actually left me a bit disappointed. We spend most of the book worrying about Eric's arrival, and a lot of the book I was spent wondering, oh, did Eric actually do these crimes, or was it Frank? Did Eric even exist? That sort of thing. In the end, when Eric does show up, it feels a bit anticlimactic. I know talking about anticlimactic and there's a bunch of flaming sheep running around is a bit of a weird thing, but it was built up as such this big thing, and then Eric shows up, sets some sheep on fire, which is terrible, tries to blow up the house, fails, and that's kind of it, and he just leaves. He just goes and sits down at the beach. I was left that we were missing a confrontation there between Eric and his father, or Eric and Frank, all three of them, to explore a bit more about how Eric turned out the way he did. The explanation of Eric's mental collapse when he finds the maggots inside the baby's brain is one of the hardest parts of the book to read, and was shocking to say the least. But I really did think that there needed to be a bit more of an exploration of how Frank and Eric's father affected Eric's life, and how his failings might have led to where we are. Welcome back. If you've skipped the spoilers, thank you so much. This was a hard book, full of topics that are hard and confronting, and full of scenes that were difficult to read. But at the same time, it was also very interesting. I think overall this book isn't my jam. It's not the sort of book that I enjoy reading, but I see that it was a very well done book. I think overall though, for me, personally, subjectively, I'm giving Wasp Factory about a 5 out of 10. It's a book that I'm glad I've read. It's a book that I'm glad I can tick off my list as having read, but it's not a book that I'm going to look back on particularly fondly, and it's definitely not a book I'm going to be looking to reread anytime soon. But I think that it's going to stick in my brain for a while. However, I'm not sure that's a good thing. Thank you so much for watching, if you still are. If you've read any other of the non-science fiction Banks books, then let me know if I should read them. I was looking at, I think it was called 𝕬𝕬𝕜. That sounds like it might be pretty interesting. But for now, I might be sticking to my Iain M. Banks books over my Iain Banks books. If you enjoyed the video, then leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment below, do all those algorithm things. But most of all, please just remember to keep reading. Thank you so much for watching. Ciao.